The Denver Broncos have wrapped up week 1 of OTAs, and rookie quarterback Bo Nix has a lot of confidence in his arm, but the quarterback competition isn't necessarily keeping scorecards just yet. We'll tell you why on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's happening? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Special shout out to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thank you so much for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more, especially as there is a quarterback competition, not just quarterback, but a widespread realm of competition across various positions all throughout the summer. Locked On Broncos is your go-to here. I'm Cody Roark. I cover the Broncos for Mile High Sports as a reporter in person daily in Dove Valley, joined alongside as always by Sayre Bedinger, who's been covering the Broncos for years as the site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. And look, let's waste no time here getting into the meat and potatoes on today's episode of the show. Sayre, we had a chance for the first time during the OTA period to watch Broncos practice on Thursday in Dove Valley. And look, really everybody's focused on the quarterback competition between Bo Nix, Jarrett Stidham, and Zach Wilson. Bo Nix has a lot of confidence in his arm. You can tell that. Jarrett Stidham, methodical. Zach Wilson, you can also tell, has some arm confidence as well. Nobody's really keeping score here in OTAs, and I think that's something that Sean Payton highlighted early on in the press conference when talking about it. No one's keeping a scorecard, and nobody should read into the order in which quarterbacks are getting reps. And I agree, because then I think it would make this whole conversation surrounding this quarterback competition, I think, absolutely senseless. I think it would drive Broncos fans crazy from that standpoint. So right now, quarterbacks just going with the flow, and a good sign here because all quarterbacks had a pretty solid day on Thursday.
And Sean Payton said that as of this OTAs, because this was the first practice that was open to media viewing, he said that at day 1, it was Jarrett Stidham getting the first team reps. At day 2, it was Zach Wilson. And there on day 3, then it was Bo Nix. So I think he's kind of just being as open as possible with this process. But what he did say about Bo Nix was encouraging, right? I mean, he said to the media, Cody, as you were standing there listening to him, he said that Bo is further along than most guys are at this point in the process. And he pointed to his experience at Oregon and Auburn, obviously playing a lot of games at the collegiate level. And that kind of experience obviously translates to confidence on the field, right? Because you've had so much time on task, you've played so much football, and we've all heard about how Bo Nix's game and what he did at Oregon translates so well to what he's going to be able to do in Sean Payton's offense. It just makes sense that he's operating out there with a certain level of confidence. As you hear reports across the league of, JJ McCarthy struggling. I saw a report on Thursday that Caleb Williams had a bad day running with the starters. Look, folks, those days are going to happen. It's so important not to read into all that stuff, because these guys need to be allowed to fail forward as rookie quarterbacks in the NFL. It doesn't matter if you're 24 like Bo Nix or 21 like JJ McCarthy, you're going to have opportunities to fail forward. He's going to get picked off by Pat Surtain. He might get picked off by somebody who's not even going to make the practice squad. We don't know, but look, the practice field is where these things get ironed out. It's where you learn, it's where you grow. I think there's, like you said, no overreacting to anything one way or the other, whether it's how reps are getting divvied out or what we're seeing from these guys. And I think from all accounts, it sounds like Bo did pretty well.
Yeah, Bo did. And look, here's one thing, being there at practice, watching it, one thing I liked about just watching Bo, even when he was under center, like even in individual period and when they transitioned to team, he seemed very comfortable. He seemed very like there was nothing out of the ordinary. He looked like he's been running the offense for quite some time. I'd say every quarterback here, Jarrett Stidham, Zach Wilson included, they also look comfortable. But I would say where I noticed Bo Nix probably had an advantage over all those guys was against pressure. And look, I'm going to mention this again. Nick Bonito, that dude is a pressure creator. I mean, he's very, very fast. His first move, it looks like he got a little bit more explosive, but there were several times where He got in the backfield really, really quickly. And I thought Bo did a really good job. It didn't look like he was shaken in the pocket. Now, granted, you're not going to get hit. You're not going to get touched. But to be able to feel that, he had a good sense of the pressure around him. And I thought he made really good decisions, including sometime he even stepped up in the middle of the pocket and threw a sidearm, which was a beautiful strike to Josh Reynolds to open up the first part of the team period that they did. I was impressed with his level of poise and confidence. Jarrett Stidham, we'll talk about him here as we go through the quarterback competition. Thought he had a solid day. And he, I think he had a couple of nice throws there. But I think the idea of trying to keep score of how these guys did and who's ahead, who's not, I mean, it's really just a content practice for most people. But I want to promise Broncos fans, we're going to react to everything objectively and fairly here. We're not going to say, okay, this guy's the declared winner of this day. It's hard to evaluate because we don't know, first off, who their read was. We don't know what the play call was. We just go based on the energy and where things are at. But I think all three quarterbacks had a good day. Zach Wilson did throw an interception during practice. I felt like there was maybe one of those concepts. And once again, this is just me basing off the memory of it happening live. But it looked like there were two receivers kind of in the same area. He went to deliver a ball, which, look, dude from throwing from his side has a lot of power in his arm. He's got a lot of arm power, a lot of arm confidence there. And it was almost caught by the receiver, but a defensive back jumped it, made a really good play there. Good play by the defense. You can see why he made that throw there initially. But overall, I think the quarterback competition, it's a marathon, Sayre. It's not a sprint. I think a lot of people are looking to crown people after one day. Look, Bo Nix looked good. Jarrett Stidham looked solid. And so did Zach Wilson. So, after watching practice and hearing Sean Payton, I don't think that they're in a process to rush this, though. I will say that the rep divvy out, like it went out as we anticipated, where, okay, hey, if they ran 21 plays, Bo got 7, Jarrett got 7, Zach got 7. These guys are getting equal reps, equal opportunities. But I also like this as well. At receiver, tight end, running back, they're rotating guys in and out consistently, a wide number of different guys. So I like the fact that they're maximizing volume, maximizing reps, and their skill player sets to see who can thrive with who. And that is a good, especially with Courtland Sutton not being out there at organized team activities. But that did lead to somebody emerging a little bit here for the Broncos in the pass catching department from all quarterbacks during Thursday's OTA practice and earning some rave reviews from Broncos head coach Sean Payton. Lucas Krull was a big-time standout on Thursday, and we'll tell you why we believe he's going to be in line for a premier role for the Broncos offense in 2024. You're going to get that and much more here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode, Locked on Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at eBay Motors. Now, passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
Denver Broncos head coach Sean Payton says you better get to know number 85 on the roster. That's tight end Lucas Krull. Cody and I are going to tell you exactly why head coach Sean Payton is excited about this young tight end and playmaker. But I got to ask you a question. You've been watching national sports outlets like Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV. You got to turn down the volume because there's all that shouting and it's getting you all triggered out there when you're watching. I know that happens to me. Well, guess what? You can make the switch to on Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that's programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked on Sports today is going to bring you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, as you always know. And Locked On Broncos listeners, we appreciate you everydayers out there for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. And if you watch the show and subscribe on YouTube, Cody and I appreciate you so much for doing that as well. And look, let's talk about this. Let's talk about Lucas Krull. We saw and we talked about him late last season, Cody, as you and I actually talked off the air a couple of times. You were like, hey, I can't say anything about this yet, but Lucas Krull has been getting some packages. At this point, he was still a practice squad player last year. And you were telling me like he's getting some packages in practice. They're getting him ready to play. And then we saw it against Buffalo, right? We saw him make his debut. He got called up, made a couple of plays late last season, but it sounds like from what Sean Payton was saying, he was still seeing a lot of people in the media scanning their rosters to try to figure out who this guy is. I know that wasn't you. You know who number 85 is. You know Lucas Krull, but tell the listeners of Locked On Broncos what you saw out there and why Sean Payton was so effusive in his praise of Lucas Krull after practice.
Well, first off, I think we were just looking at the tight end roster. Okay, who's there, who's not there? Greg Dulcich was not at practice on Thursday, and we talked to Sean Payton after practice and asked about him, and he said, hey, he's not out there at practice yet. He's close. He says you're going to see him on the practice field sooner rather than later. He said it won't be any later than training camp, so we should see him before the Broncos even go to training camp. We could see him next week or in 2 weeks when OTAs continue, and also I'd anticipate we'll probably see him for mandatory minicamp on June 11th through the 13th. So Broncos country, don't worry too much about that. But it seems like for what we saw from Lucas Krull, right, number 85 here, it seems like Sean Payton, and you and I did an episode on this, I think a couple of weeks ago, we were saying, okay, hey, why didn't the Broncos make a move at the tight end position in the NFL draft? It's clear that they maybe had some interest in some guys out there, but I think that they decided to run it back with the group that they had, Sayre, because of the fact that now Sean Payton isn't going into this offseason banking fully on the health of Greg Dulcich. Instead, I think that Lucas Krull is a huge part of Sean Payton's plan this upcoming season. And I think Thursday's practice, if anything to me, from my observation, was a great indicator. He, in my opinion, this isn't going to be a hot take. I firmly believe that Lucas is going to be the starting tight end for the Broncos come week 1. 6'6". Dude runs unbelievably fast. One of the fastest guys on the field. He was overall, you can make the argument, was the best player on the field on Thursday, getting involved in the passing game in the short to intermediate. We're talking like quick routes where then he's using his yard after the catch with his speed and his athleticism to get upfield and get away from guys there. And then he was getting downfield as well. Like he just shows great focus in terms of tracking the football. Had a couple of big plays, had one really nice play against Jaquan McMillan. We'll dive a little bit more into that, but it was exciting to see him use his body and his size and athleticism to box out and to make an athletic play on a highly contested throw there. That's what you want to see, right? And I think so much of Sean's offense and what we have talked about is Denver has not had that dynamic in a couple of years. Like Dulcich showed some splashes here and there under Nathaniel Hackett, but we didn't see any tight end really emerge for the Broncos last season. Lucas is fully ingrained in terms of what Sean Payton is doing. And after he made that catch, he came over and he was talking to him. And it seems like there's much more confidence now in Lucas Krull there, because I can tell you during those times where I was telling you last year, Sayre, like, hey, they're working him in packages. Sean Payton, at times when Lucas wouldn't run a route the right way or didn't run it tight enough, I mean, Sean ripped into Lucas big time there, but now he's got confidence, and it seems like Lucas is picking up exactly what Sean wants in terms of his offense there. I think he's going to be their premier feature in terms of the offensive side of the ball. I think you'll see Greg Dulcich, if he stays healthy, come along and factor into that, but I think it is Lucas Krull as tight end 1 for Denver. I think that's going to be the emphasis here for Sean Payton and this offense and whoever's at quarterback, because it seemed like he caught passes from all 3 guys during Thursday's session.
Well, you said it, what he did on the field. Let's talk about, I guess, the numbers of like what kind of athleticism does he actually have here? A 9.07 on the RAS scale, which we talk about often, relative athletic score, 6'6" and change, like you mentioned, Cody, over 250 pounds, a 35-inch vertical jump and a 10-foot broad jump. But the 40-yard dash, a 4.64, puts him in the 90th percentile among players at his position group, which is pretty impressive. A top 100 athletic score out of tight ends from 1987 to 2022. So what we're talking about here is a guy that's very athletic, who showed a lot of promise and led all tight ends in the NFL last preseason in receiving yards. Remember, that was Lucas Krull is the reason why the Broncos traded Albert Okwuegbunam. Remember that, how unpopular that decision was at the time?
Yeah.
You and I talked about it all throughout last year. Lucas Krull is the reason they did that. They added him to the practice squad. He chose to sign in Denver over returning to New Orleans, where he had spent the 2022 2 season, his rookie year in the NFL. So he chose the Broncos. He has no ties to Sean Payton, but ironically, this may be one of the better guys that Sean Payton steals from the New Orleans Saints.
And I think that he has steel written all over him. And, a guy that's like, all right, hey, you didn't know what you were getting necessarily. You saw potential. You saw some of the flashes. I think when you look at some of his college tape, you're like, wow, like, hey, this guy has some tools and some traits to work with. And I think that I think he fits exactly what Sean wants in terms of that athletic makeup. And I'm not trying to compare him to a Jimmy Graham or anything like that, but I think we might see Sean try to use Lucas Krull the way that he used Jimmy Graham when he was a member of the New Orleans Saints. I think that there's a lot of upside here, not just as an inline guy, but I mean, this is a guy, Sayre, who can play inline. He can play in the slot. He can play on the outside. And he can also line up in the backfield if the Broncos want to get really creative next to whoever's at quarterback. I mean, you could see a pistol look with the tight end or an H-back. He can play the H-back role there and then have a running back in the backfield next to him. And then you can do a wide variety of different things with him there. To me, I like that. And it just seems that Denver has some more options there. So now, while Lucas was obviously, I think, in my opinion, from an offensive standout of the day, I think we also have to mention Josh Reynolds, the Broncos free agency acquisition. I felt like Josh had a really impressive day. He's bigger in person, right? You see him on TV, like, okay, hey, this guy looks tall, but like he is bigger in person. He plays big, has a really good catch radius to him. It was good to see Tim Patrick back out there making catches. We'll talk about him in Monday's episode of Locked On Broncos. But with all the wide receivers that were getting reps, Jalen Virgil, Brandon Johnson, Troy Franklin, Devon Vele, like all these guys were getting in the mix and they were making catches. They were consistent, didn't see a lot of drops. And I think that was a good sign here for Thursday's practice. And obviously it's about stacking it day after day after day. Can the Broncos continue to do that is a huge question. But I like what I saw here overall from Denver. Primarily when we talk about tight end, Sayre, it was Lucas getting a majority of the reps, Adam Troutman secondary at that point, and then a little bit of Nate Adkins and Thomas Yasmin getting involved in the mix, but no Greg Dulcich as he was working on the side field. I mean, like I said, we got to see him walking off the field after practice. He looks like he's in good spirits. He looks like he's ready to get back out there. So if he can come in after everything, after all the injuries, I think that maybe he can also have a big role too. Look, even if he's not the premier guy and Lucas Krull is, Greg Dulcich could still have a big impact on what the Broncos want to do offensively. And heck, it just gives them more options, especially with the rule changes now that we're seeing with the kick return game. That's going to factor to how many guys that the Broncos keep that may be different positions. You may see more skill players now than you've ever seen before because of that. I'm very excited. I think there's so much that's going to go into this competition this entire offseason.
And there was a lot of 12 personnel and 13 personnel used by the Broncos last year, but it could be a lot different this season, right? It could be 12 and 13 personnel in terms of we're trying to get these guys out there to catch passes as opposed to we need, these guys to block. We need them to help pass protect. I mean, it might not be as much of that and more of the, the pass catching aspect, but that would be, I think, welcomed in Broncos country. I mean, you want to see the playmakers making plays, and I love that option. And of course, you need to have depth at a position where, frankly, right now, I think people would look at the Broncos tight end position and say, there's not really depth there. You don't know what you're getting from Dulcich. Nobody really knows who Lucas Krull is. But, Cody, I found it interesting. I posted the quote that Sean Payton made on Twitter or X or whatever you're calling it these days. I posted his quote there, and a number of people who work for fantasy football outlets were retweeting it. So maybe it's piquing a little bit of interest there to find out who is going to be that featured tight end in Sean Payton's offense. As you're suggesting, maybe Lucas Krull could end up being this season.
Well, I said it a couple of months back. I even said it on the show as we were previewing free agency and saying, hey, like, don't be surprised if Lucas Krull is the premier option for the Broncos at tight end in 2024. I mean, from what we saw on Thursday, it looks like that is a sign of what we are seeing and what we may expect to see come training camp throughout the NFL preseason. Obviously, health contingent upon so many different factors for so many of these guys. But I'll tell you what, something else we talked about earlier this week as it pertains to the Broncos secondary, could there be positional versatility? Well, that was on display heavily during Thursday's practice. I'll tell you what I saw much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at Yahoo Finance. And let's get straight to the point. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising cost of inflation, to pay off your debt or your mortgage, pretty much anything standing in the way of you and financial freedom, right? With Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and the tools that you need in order to help reach that financial freedom. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you're looking for the extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and all the data that you need in one place. They are the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures that you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. The #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. As we jump to the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos wrapping up Thursday's OTA practice, giving Broncos Country the insight as to what we were able to see as Sean Payton heads into his second season as the team's head coach. Real quick, we just wanted to say thank you so much to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country who make us your first listen every single day. Whether you listen to us wherever you get your podcasts or whether you watch us on YouTube and you engage in the comment section with everybody there, we appreciate you so much for rocking with us and making us part of your day every single day, breaking down what's going on in Dove Valley from an objective point of view. No hot takes, no clickbait. We just tell you what we see and we react to it and we share our opinions, and we also welcome yours as well, Broncos Country. So, Sayre, earlier this week, I think we did an episode of the show, and one of the things we talked about is like under Jim Leonhard, like could we see more positional versatility? Because going back to the NFL Combine or even after that, Sean Payton had touched on the fact that the safety position, the guys there, they're going to have to learn how to play both roles, like not just the post safety, but also the box safety. They're going to have to understand how to just play both those roles versus just playing one role and sticking to that. Well, it seems like that's also trickling down here to the Broncos cornerback room. And I'll tell you this, look, no, Patrick Surtain, he was there at practice, was limited, was off to the side field doing some work, but we saw him during the individual period. He didn't get any reps during team. I just think that's a day off for him essentially there. I mean, great spirits after practice. We were able to chat with him for a quick minute and see him walk by. But the one thing I noticed is that there were cornerbacks there, guys who play on the inside that were playing on the outside, and guys playing on the outside who were switching and playing on the inside. And I think that is something to me that has me excited. Now, being able to have a better view of practice here, we're able to watch. And I was just watching Jim Leonhard coach up the defensive backs. So much of what I felt like his philosophy would be, we're seeing so far. We're seeing guys like Damari Mathis and Riley Moss play outside, but also play some inside reps there. Jaquan McMillan, who we all know was the Broncos starting nickel last year, was playing on the outside and some cornerback reps on the boundary. I love to see that, and it just gives, I think, the coaching staff more of an appeal, like, hey, if we really want to maximize our matchup values against some of the better players in this year's schedule, we can move guys around because guys are knowing how to play everything. And you want to know the icing on top of the cake there, sir? Got to see a lot of press coverage, which I've been asking for that for the last year and a half. I like the Jim Leonhard hire right away because we're seeing some really nice things out there at practice, and guys are elevating each other in terms of competition. It's been really good. The secondary was fun to watch on Thursday.
And it's fun to hear because you don't really talk a lot about defensive backfields as like a personnel grouping. We talked about that with, wide receiver. We talked about that with other position groups, but you don't often hear that about the defensive backfield, right? But it makes a lot of sense to be able to go into a week and say, now we really feel like, Riley Moss fits well against whoever, maybe you're playing the Chicago Bears one week. I know the Broncos aren't this year, but Keenan Allen in the slot or something like that. And you're like, hey, let's get him in the slot and let's put, either Mathis or Wallace on the outside with Surtain on the other. And you just kind of figure out all these different ways to play chess. And it keeps opposing offenses on their toes because they don't necessarily know who's this guy going to be getting matched up against. It's not always going to be Jaquan McMillan in the slot. It's not always going – like you said in the cornerback episode that we talked about, it could end up being a situation where Pat Surtain floats around the formation. We saw the Los Angeles Rams start kind of doing some of that stuff with Jalen Ramsey. I'm not saying it'll be the exact same with Pat Surtain, but hey, you never know. You want to put your guys in positions to best defend. I mean, let's just take the Chiefs for instance, right? Travis Kelce. There's no linebacker out there, Broncos country, that there's no lab that you could create any sort of linebacker in that's going to be able to cover Travis Kelce. And so what does that mean? That means you're going to have to find other ways to get that done, because he often lines up as a big slot. So you're going to have these guys able to play different alignments in their coverage. They're going to have to play different roles, and you're going to have to be able to blitz. All these guys could be, and injuries happen. So you're going to have to be asked to do a lot of different things. I love that Jim Leonhard is doing this, that, Sean Payton, Vance Joseph, etc. I think the addition, Cody, of Jim Leonhard, as you and I talked about, is going to end up being one of the most underrated moves the Broncos made all offseason.
I agree with you too. And look, let's talk about maybe some of the players Broncos country wants to hear about in the secondary. I know a lot of fans are excited about Riley Moss. I know you're excited about Riley Moss. Riley looked pretty sharp on the day. I mean, one thing I noticed about him when watching him, whether he's playing off coverage, whether he's playing press coverage, we saw a lot of him working toward the end of last year. We saw him work a little bit more inside the slot and the nickel, just because that's where Denver probably had the best opening right now. But obviously seeing him work on the outside and exchange reps with different guys between Damari Mathis and Levi Wallace and Jaquan McMillan and even some of the other guys that we're talking about, like Art Green. One thing I noticed about him, man, he's just got such fluid hips. He's got great feet. I think he's got great instincts, and I think he's disciplined with his eyes. When you're playing press coverage, one of the things we always coach up, and Jim Leonhard coaches this up to a T, I watched him do it, is you always want to make sure your eyes are on the hip of that receiver, right? You never want to look up at the chest. You never want to look at the shoulder pads. You never want to look at the helmet of the guy. You want to look at the hip, and you want to be able to get a little bit of feel, right? Shakira said it, the hips don't lie. And that's the same like when you're playing defensive back. If you trust it, if you watch it, you're going to find a way to get to the position you need to be, especially when you're playing man coverage. And I think that Damari Mathis also had a really good day, in my opinion. One thing I noticed from him, he had a really good rep against Tim Patrick, where it was a vertical seam, and Tim ran a good route, ran it tight. Damari did a good job getting into his hip cushion and using the sideline, kind of squeezing there. And then it was an adjustment because it was a really good throw there by Bo Nix. Tim Patrick adjusted to it, caught the ball, but, only got 1 foot in. So it ended up being incomplete, but the coverage was great. Like, it was one of those reps. It's like, you can't get mad at the coverage. You love the catch there by Tim Patrick, but you just got to get the 2 feet in there. You love the throw by Bo Nix. It was in a good spot there, all things considered. And it was like, all right, hey, that's how you get better. Like, you get competition there. The DBs on the sideline, they're signaling incomplete. The offensive guys, they're signaling first down. You see the competition. You see the banter. Like, the guys are having fun out there while also competing with one another. You love to see that. And Jaquan McMillan also making some plays on the outside. I had a really good rep in practice where he was playing outside corner. And I think Lucas Krull came from a different position. I don't want to say it without giving away. I'm not allowed to give that type of information. But let's just say there was a play where the ball was thrown vertically. Jaquan McMillan, playing a zone coverage there, went to go help, had a great play on the ball, but Lucas Krull just kind of big-bodied and just made a huge catch there. Great coverage by Jaquan, great catch by, obviously, Lucas Krull, and that was obviously complete. One of the plays of the day there for the Broncos offense. And I think overall, like, there's just a lot of excitement, Sayre. You're seeing all the receivers getting involved there. But I would say from the secondary standpoint, let's go to PJ Locke. Let's also go to Brandon Jones, who's the newest addition. I think those guys, they do a really good job of complementing one another, being able to play kind of the same philosophy. Like, PJ can roll down to the box, can play middle of the field. Brandon Jones can do the same. We did not see Caden Stearns at practice. He was there, didn't have a helmet on. They're easing him back from what I'm told. They're just being smart with him, and they're just continuing to monitor that. He should be ready to go for mandatory minicamp and also training camp. But really like what I saw out of the rotation there from the Broncos at cornerback, inside the nickel, and also at the safety position. A lot of guys getting action. Are there any questions that maybe you have that I haven't even touched on yet?
No, I was going to bring up Caden Stearns actually and ask about him and what the process or plan was for him. And maybe I'm sure fans would be eager to learn about, hey, what's the deal with JL Skinner? Like, we haven't talked about him all offseason. So what did you see from JL Skinner? He
looks solid. Good. He looks solid, and he looks faster, like a little more confident. If you go to my social media threads or Twitter X, wherever they call it, I posted my video report from Dove Valley. It contains some footage that I shot. JL Skinner looks lean. He looks tall. He looks fast. I mean, he looks fully healthy, and I think we're going to see a little bit more from him. Comes downhill really, really hard. Love to see the reps that he's continuing to get there. And there's even Tanner McAllister. Is that, I think, Trying to remember.
Yeah.
Where's the paper that I have
It's
here from
10.
practice?
Yeah, the guy who's wearing number 30 that everybody's upset about. Yeah.
I legitimately thought for a minute, I was like, that looks like Caden Stearns. I'm like, wait, Caden changed the number. But Tanner McAllister actually also had a pretty impressive day at practice. 6'1", 200 pounds, good speed, good reaction time there. I mean, it's just so hard to put it all into a vacuum here, like in terms of just one day of practice. But overall, I felt like offense, defense, guys had a really, really good day, but I'm so excited about the positional versatility. We're going to see guys move around in the secondary a little bit, Sayre, and I think that could be a good thing for the Broncos when they actually start getting into games. And obviously, preseason is going to be coming up, and Sean Payton said it's not necessarily going to be about scheme in the preseason. It's about roster evaluation. So we're going to see a lot of the things that, I think are going to unfold and really tell the story of this Broncos 2024 team come the regular season in sprinkles instead of all at once. I'm excited to see how that ride's going to pan out here for Broncos Country. But with that said, Broncos Country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show. Free and available everywhere you get your podcasts, or available on YouTube. For all you everydayers out there in Broncos Country, week 2 of Broncos OTAs continues next week. We'll get access to one practice once again there. But one of the storylines, Tim Patrick has been a standout in the eyes of Sean Payton. Sean Payton seems to have a lot of value on him. We'll talk about his role here, how it impacts everything with the Courtland Sutton situation, and much more. You're going to get that on Monday's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.